I remember the smell first. Antiseptic. Plastic. Something cold and metallic in the air. And then the voice. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. My father. Even in a coma, even floating somewhere between life and nothingness, I recognized his voice. Calm. Calculated. Detached. Like he was negotiating a used car. Not his daughter's life. Not mine. I wasn't always the unwanted child. At least, I don't think I was. My name is Alara Whitmore. I'm 26 years old. Or at least I was when my father decided my life cost too much. If you had met my family from the outside, you would have called us respectable. My father owned several rental properties. My stepmother chaired charity events. We lived in a colonial house with white pillars and imported marble floors. But inside those walls? I was a financial inconvenience. My mother died when I was 9. Brain aneurysm. Sudden. Brutal. After that, something inside my father hardened. He remarried quickly. Too quickly. Vanessa. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. Perfect venom. From the moment she moved in, I became a problem. Alara is too emotional. Alara is dramatic. Alara doesn't fit our image. I was 13 when Vanessa first called me a burden. I remember because I was holding a report card, straight A's, hoping for approval. Instead, she sighed and said, "Good grades don't erase what you cost." I didn't understand then. But I do now. I was an expense. Tuition. Clothes. Insurance. An investment with no immediate return. And my father? He loved returns. The accident happened on a Thursday night. Rain. Slippery highway. A delivery truck ran a red light. I don't remember the impact. Just the sound, like the world splitting open. When I woke up briefly in the ambulance, I heard someone say, "Internal bleeding." Then darkness swallowed me whole. While I lay unconscious, the doctors called my father. They explained the situation: emergency surgery, high risk, expensive. Very expensive. I later obtained the recording. Yes, there was a recording. Hospital's archive calls. That detail will matter later. The surgeon's voice was firm. If we operate now, her chances improve significantly. My father's response? A pause. A long pause. Then, what happens if we don't? Silence. Without surgery, the doctor said carefully, she may not survive the night. Another pause. And then the sentence that shattered whatever illusion I had left about him. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. He didn't even lower his voice. He didn't ask about pain. He didn't ask about hope. Just cost. But that wasn't the worst part. No. The worst part came later. When I learned he signed a Do Not Resuscitate order. In my name. Forged. I never consented. I was 26. Legally independent. He had no authority. But he signed it anyway. Because dead daughters don't inherit property. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, had just updated her will. She left her lake house to me. Not to him. Not to Vanessa. To me. The same week I went into a coma. Funny timing, isn't it? You're probably wondering how I survived. So am I. The attending physician that night was Dr. Hale. And something about my case bothered him. Maybe it was my age. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. He reviewed my chart and noticed something. The signature on the DNR didn't match my driver's license signature. Not even close. And the consent section? Improperly filled. He stalled. He ordered temporary stabilization procedures. Not technically surgery. But enough to keep me alive. Long enough. 72 hours later. I opened my eyes. When I woke up, the room was dim. Machines beeped steadily beside me. My throat burned from the ventilator tube. And I felt empty. Like something had been taken from me. Because something had. My father hadn't visited once. Vanessa had told hospital staff I had no close friends. She blocked my phone. She even redirected my mail. By the time I was conscious enough to understand what happened, they had already moved. Sold assets. Transferred funds. And filed paperwork to take control of my grandmother's estate, claiming I was in a permanent vegetative state. Permanent. They had written me off. Legally. Emotionally. Financially. Dead without a funeral. The first person who told me the truth was Dr. Hale. He pulled a chair beside my bed. "You need to hear this carefully," he said. His voice was calm, but I saw anger behind his eyes. He told me about the DNR. The refusal of surgery. The forged signature. And then he said something that changed everything. "We have documentation." Documentation. Proof. My father thought I'd never wake up. He thought no one would question it. He thought he could erase me. He underestimated two things. My survival. And my memory. Recovery was slow. Painful. But pain is clarifying. While I learned to walk again, I planned. While I endured physical therapy, I listened. While nurses whispered sympathy, I gathered information. The hospital's legal department had opened an internal investigation. Forgery is a crime. Medical coercion is a crime. Attempted financial exploitation? Also a crime. But I didn't rush. Revenge isn't about impulse. It's about precision. When I was discharged, I didn't go home. Because there was no home. My father had changed the locks. He claimed the house was renovating. In reality, he had listed it for sale. Including my belongings. My childhood photos. My mother's jewelry. My grandmother's letters. All itemized. All monetized. So I did something he never expected. I went public. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Strategically. I contacted my grandmother's attorney. I requested a full copy of her will. And then I filed a fraud report. The look on my father's face when he first saw me standing in the courtroom? I will treasure it forever. Vanessa dropped her purse. He turned pale. Because ghosts aren't supposed to testify. And I wasn't just alive. I was furious. But that was only the beginning. He thought money was power. He thought signatures controlled fate. He thought daughters were disposable. He forgot one thing. I had nothing left to lose. And people with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous of all. This was not just survival. This was reclamation. And I wasn't done. Not even close. The first time my father saw me standing in that courtroom, he didn't look angry. He looked afraid. And that was new. For years, I had only seen two versions of him, cold indifference or polished authority. He was the kind of man who controlled rooms without raising his voice. A real estate investor. A donor. A man who shook hands firmly and smiled for cameras. But that morning? His jaw tightened. His fingers trembled slightly against the polished oak table. Because dead daughters don't walk into probate court. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No gasps. No cinematic music. Just paperwork. And truth. My grandmother's attorney, Mr. Calloway, had requested an emergency hearing the moment he learned I was alive and competent. Competent. The word felt powerful. Because according to the documents my father had filed, I was permanently incapacitated. He had submitted medical statements claiming I would never regain cognitive function. He attached the forged DNR. He attached a fabricated physician summary. He even included a petition to assume power of attorney over my assets, retroactively. Retroactively. He tried to rewrite reality. When the judge entered, my father straightened his tie. Vanessa kept her eyes on the table. She didn't dare look at me. Which was ironic. Because she used to stare at me like I was something she scraped off her shoe. My attorney presented the hospital's evidence first. The forged signature. The altered documentation. The audio recording. They played it. That sentence echoed through the quiet courtroom. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. You could feel the shift in the air. My father shifted in his seat. The judge's expression hardened. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father without control. But he wasn't stupid. He didn't argue emotionally. He pivoted. He claimed confusion. He claimed stress. He claimed he misunderstood the severity of my condition. He even tried to frame it as mercy. She wouldn't have wanted prolonged suffering, he said calmly. I almost laughed. The man who never asked what I wanted suddenly knew my end-of-life preferences? Please. Then came the real blow. Mr. Calloway produced my grandmother's final amendment. Signed 2 days before my accident. She left me the lake house. Fully. No contingencies. And she included a handwritten letter. The judge allowed it to be read aloud. My Alara has always been stronger than they see. This home belongs to her, where she is safe. Safe. My grandmother knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. Vanessa's nails dug into her palm. I saw the red marks later when she reached for her purse. The judge froze all transfers immediately. My father's attempt to liquidate the property was suspended. An investigation was opened into financial misconduct and fraudulent medical representation. And just like that, the cracks started forming. But courtrooms are only one battlefield. The real war began outside. Within days, whispers started circulating in my father's business circles. Real estate investors talk. Quietly. Carefully. But they talk. Forgery. Fraud. Medical coercion. Those words stain reputations. And reputation was his oxygen. Then something unexpected happened. Dr. Hale contacted me again. He had filed a formal complaint with the state medical board regarding the falsified physician summary my father submitted. It wasn't written by hospital staff. It was altered. Digitally. Timestamp discrepancies. Metadata trails. My father thought he covered his tracks. But he underestimated technology. I should tell you something. Growing up, I was never allowed to show anger. Vanessa called it unladylike. My father called it irrational. So I learned to internalize. To observe. To calculate. That skill saved me. Because while they panicked publicly, I moved quietly. I hired a forensic accountant. Not because I wanted money. But because I wanted truth. And truth is expensive. Within weeks, we discovered something interesting. Several of my father's rental properties were leveraged far beyond safe limits. Loans stacked on loans. Refinanced repeatedly. On paper, he looked wealthy. In reality, he was balancing on glass. The lake house sale wasn't just greed. It was desperation. He needed liquidity. Badly. Then I found something worse. Vanessa had been siphoning funds into a private account for years. Small amounts. Unnoticeable at first. But over time? Significant. My father trusted her with bookkeeping. Irony is delicious, isn't it? The woman who called me a burden was quietly draining him. I didn't expose it immediately. I waited. Because revenge isn't just about striking. It's about timing the collapse. The first real crack happened at a charity gala. The Whitmore Foundation annual benefit. Vanessa's pride and joy. I wasn't invited. Of course not. So I bought a ticket anonymously. I wore black. Simple. Elegant. I didn't approach them at first. I let the whispers reach them organically. Heard about the court case? Isn't his daughter alive? Forgery? When my father finally saw me across the ballroom, he froze mid-sentence. His donor circle noticed. Vanessa's smile faltered. And I walked over. Calmly. Good evening, Father. The word tasted unfamiliar. He leaned in, voice tight. What are you doing here? Attending. Supporting charity. Something you taught me. His jaw clenched. Vanessa tried to intervene. Elara, this isn't appropriate. I smiled. Neither is signing your daughter's death order. The silence around us thickened. People pretended not to listen. But they were. They always are. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I simply handed him a copy of the forensic audit summary. And whispered, you should check Vanessa's transfers. Then I walked away. 3 days later, the police opened a financial review. Not because of me. Because one of his investors, already nervous, requested a transparency audit. Dominoes. Vanessa confronted him publicly. Neighbors heard shouting. Accusations. Betrayal. Trust shattered. The perfect couple fractured. And I didn't lift a finger. But I wasn't done. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about the years of humiliation. The nights I was told I was unwanted. The birthdays forgotten. The inheritance discussions whispered like I was already dead. I filed a civil suit for attempted wrongful death through medical negligence fraud. Strong words. Heavy words. They carry weight in headlines. And yes, it made headlines. Local news. Then regional. Daughter alleges father forged DNR to access inheritance. Reputation? Gone. My father tried to contact me privately. He left voicemails. At first defensive. Then pleading. Elara, this has gone too far. Too far? You signed my life away. Then he said something that almost made me feel something. Almost. I was under pressure. Pressure. As if that justified it. As if my life was a negotiable asset. The banks began calling in reviews. Properties went under scrutiny. Tenants started questioning lease security. Investors withdrew. His empire wasn't collapsing dramatically. It was eroding. Slow. Relentless. Like water wearing down stone. And then came the final piece of part 2. The lake house. I visited it alone. The place my grandmother called safe. It overlooked the water just as I remembered. Quiet. Still. Untouched. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve. Not for my father. Not for Vanessa. But for the version of me who once believed family meant protection. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone sharper. Stronger. Unafraid of confrontation. Standing on that dock, I made a promise. I wouldn't just win legally. I would dismantle the illusion he built his life on. Brick by brick. Reputation. Wealth. Image. Control. He tried to erase me. Now I would rewrite him. And the next move? Was one he would never see coming. Because buried inside old business contracts was a secret. One that could turn investigation into indictment. I didn't find the contract. It found me. That's how fate works sometimes. It waits until you're strong enough to carry the weight of what you're about to uncover. I was going through archived documents at the lake house office. My grandmother was meticulous. Every invoice, every letter, every amendment, organized by year, labeled in her looping handwriting. She never trusted my father. I used to think that was paranoia. Now I knew it was foresight. It was inside a blue accordion file labeled Whitmore Holdings, 2014 expansion. A year I remembered clearly. That was when my father's business skyrocketed. New properties. New investors. New prestige. And new arrogance. I opened the folder expecting routine contracts. Instead, I found a partnership agreement between my father and a development group for a low-income housing renovation project. On paper, it was philanthropic. Tax incentives. Community improvement. Government-backed funding. But buried in the clauses, deep in the language most people skim, was something darker. Funds allocated for structural safety upgrades had been redirected. Legally disguised as renovation optimization. In plain terms? They cut corners. Severely. And someone signed off on it. My father. My stomach twisted. Because I remembered something else about 2014. A balcony collapse in one of his renovated buildings. 3 people injured. 1 permanently disabled. At the time, it was dismissed as unexpected structural fatigue. The case settled quietly. Too quietly. I stared at the contract, my hands trembling. If the financial reallocation was intentional, if safety funds were knowingly reduced, this wasn't just fraud. This was criminal negligence. Maybe worse. I called the forensic accountant immediately. He reviewed the documentation and cross-referenced it with publicly available construction records. The numbers didn't align. Millions unaccounted for. Shifted. Disguised. Hidden in layered LLCs. And then he said something that made the air leave my lungs. This could trigger a federal investigation. I sat there in silence. Because suddenly this wasn't just about revenge. This was about consequences far bigger than me. For years, my father presented himself as a community benefactor. He cut ribbons. Donated checks. Smiled beside mayors. But behind closed doors? He gambled with people's safety. And then tried to gamble with my life. I didn't hesitate. I forwarded the documentation to my attorney. And then, through proper channels, to the regulatory board overseeing housing compliance. No drama. No theatrics. Just evidence. Clean. Precise. Irrefutable. 2 weeks later, investigators showed up at Whitmore Holdings. Unannounced. Employees whispered. Assistants panicked. Phones rang endlessly. My father called me that evening. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Elara, what have you done? The irony almost made me smile. What had I done? I survived. That's what I did. But the real explosion came from somewhere unexpected. Vanessa. She called me directly. Her voice was different. Not venomous. Not superior. Desperate. You need to stop this, she said. Stop what? You're destroying everything. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the lake. No. I'm exposing it. Silence. Then, softly, you don't understand what he's capable of. I almost laughed. Oh, I understand perfectly. What I didn't expect was what came next. Vanessa asked to meet. In private. Against my better judgment, and with legal precautions, I agreed. Public cafe. Daytime. Recorded. She arrived without her usual elegance. No polished smile. No designer confidence. Just exhaustion. And fear. She didn't waste time. He's been moving assets offshore. My heart slowed. Since when? Since you woke up. Of course. Damage control. I studied her carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because predators don't confess without motive. She swallowed. He doesn't trust me anymore. He thinks I leaked something. And did you? She didn't answer. Which was answer enough. Then she leaned forward and lowered her voice. You think he only forged your signature? My pulse quickened. What else? There are other documents. Insurance claims. Injury settlements. He's manipulated records before. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not shock. Validation. He had always been this way. I just didn't see it as a child. Vanessa slid a small flash drive across the table. He keeps digital backups. I copied these before he changed passwords. And why? I asked calmly, should I trust you? Because if he goes down, I go down with him. Honesty at last. Self-preservation. I didn't thank her. I took the drive and left. That night, with my legal team present, we reviewed the contents. It was worse than I imagined. Fabricated inspection approvals. Bribery-adjacent communications. Pressure emails to contractors. And a draft of a document. A guardianship petition. Dated 2 days after my accident. He wasn't just trying to access the lake house. He was trying to gain permanent control over every asset in my name. Including a trust my mother established before she died. He had never told me about that trust. Never. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't panic. It was clarity. My father didn't act in moments of weakness. He operated in patterns. Strategic. Calculated. Patient. Just like me. Only difference? I had a conscience. The federal inquiry moved quickly once the safety fund misallocation surfaced. News outlets picked it up. Local developer under investigation for housing fund irregularities. Investors fled. Banks froze credit lines. Tenants demanded inspections. And then the family friends started disappearing. Funny how loyalty evaporates when cameras appear. But my father still believed he could outmaneuver this. He requested a private meeting through attorneys. Neutral location. Witnesses present. I agreed. Because I wanted to see his eyes when he realized he had already lost. He looked older. Not physically broken. But strained. He didn't greet me as his daughter. He greeted me as an adversary. You've made your point, he said evenly. This isn't about making a point. What do you want? There it was. The negotiation. He always reduced everything to transaction. I leaned forward. I want accountability. You're being emotional. I smiled faintly. No. I'm being strategic. His expression darkened. You think exposing me will fix what you feel? This isn't about feelings. It was. But not in the way he thought. This is about consequences. He tried one final tactic. Blame. You've always resented me. Ever since your mother died. The audacity. You're right, I said calmly. I resented being treated like an expense. His silence confirmed everything. Then he said something that cemented my resolve forever. I did what I thought was necessary. Necessary. To let me die? To forge my signature? To siphon safety funds? Necessary. I stood up. No. You did what was profitable. And I walked away. Within a month, formal charges were being discussed. Civil suits multiplied. Former tenants came forward. The injured resident from 2014 reopened their case. The balcony collapse wasn't an accident. It was negligence disguised as efficiency. Vanessa attempted to negotiate immunity. She offered testimony. Partial cooperation. Self-serving, but effective. She would survive this. Barely. My father? Not so certain. And yet, even as his empire cracked, even as headlines multiplied, even as investigators combed through years of corruption, he still underestimated me. Because he thought revenge meant destruction. But true revenge is transformation. I wasn't just tearing down his world. I was rebuilding mine. Stronger. Cleaner. Transparent. I established a legal foundation in my grandmother's name, dedicated to housing safety reform. Every interview I gave was composed, controlled, measured. I never screamed. I never insulted. I simply told the truth. And truth is sharper than rage. But the final blow of part 3 came unexpectedly. One evening, as I returned to the lake house, I noticed something wrong. The front door was slightly open. Lights on. I never leave lights on. My pulse slowed, not sped. Fear had left me long ago. Inside, papers were scattered across the desk. Drawers opened. Nothing major missing. Except one thing. The original 2014 contract. Gone. And on the kitchen counter, a single handwritten note. You should have stayed dead. No signature. But I knew the handwriting. I grew up seeing it on birthday cards he barely signed. He wasn't collapsing quietly. He was cornered. And cornered men make dangerous choices. I stood in that silent house, holding the note, and realized something important. This was no longer just legal. This was personal. Again. He had moved from fraud to intimidation. And that was a mistake. Because now, I wouldn't just expose him. I would finish him. The note didn't scare me. It clarified things. You should have stayed dead. For most of my life, those words would have shattered me. I would have cried. Questioned myself. Wondered what I did wrong to deserve that kind of hatred. But standing in my grandmother's kitchen, holding that paper in my hand, I didn't feel like a daughter. I felt like a witness. And witnesses don't tremble. They testify. I didn't call my father. I called the police. The break-in was documented. Fingerprints were taken. Security footage from nearby properties was collected. The lake house didn't have cameras yet, that was my mistake, but the neighboring property did. And guess whose car was caught driving past twice that evening? My father's. He would later claim he was checking on the property. At midnight. Without notifying me. After freezing me out of my own home months earlier. The excuses were getting weaker. My attorney filed for a restraining order the next morning. Not as revenge. As protection. That distinction mattered. When the hearing date arrived, the courtroom felt different from the first one. Less shocking. More final. My father sat across from me again, but something had shifted. He didn't look angry this time. He looked cornered. The prosecutor had already announced formal charges related to financial misconduct tied to the housing project. Federal review was underway. Bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. And now, there was documented harassment. Intimidation. Possible evidence tampering. He had crossed from white-collar arrogance into visible desperation. When I took the stand, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I simply held up the note and said, "This is not the action of a man seeking reconciliation. This is the action of someone trying to silence me." The judge granted the restraining order. 50 yards. No direct or indirect contact. No visits to my residence. No third-party intimidation. For the first time in my life, the law had drawn a line between us. And he couldn't step over it. Vanessa testified 2 weeks later in the federal inquiry. I watched remotely. She didn't cry. She didn't defend him. She answered questions. Carefully. Precisely. She confirmed financial transfers. Verified altered documents. Admitted she copied digital files. When asked why, she paused. And then she said, because I realized if he could sign his daughter's death order, no one was safe. That sentence spread through media like wildfire. It was quoted in headlines. It became the narrative pivot. This wasn't a messy family dispute anymore. It was a pattern of moral vacancy. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. No dramatic chase. No spectacle. Just two federal agents walking into the Whitmore Holdings office while employees watched in stunned silence. Fraud. Financial misrepresentation. Obstruction of investigation. He wasn't handcuffed publicly, professional courtesy, but he walked out flanked on both sides. Control gone. Image gone. Power gone. People ask me if I felt satisfied. If I felt victorious. The truth? I felt steady. Like something heavy had finally been set down. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't about screaming triumph while someone else collapses. It's about balance being restored. He tried to erase me. Legally. Financially. Physically. And in the end, his own actions erased him. The civil suits drained what remained of his resources. Properties were sold under court supervision. Investments dissolved. Partnerships severed. Whitmore Holdings became a cautionary tale whispered in real estate circles. Remember what happened there? Yes. They remembered. As for Vanessa, she negotiated reduced liability in exchange for cooperation. She disappeared from charity circuits. Moved states. Started over quietly. I don't hate her. She was opportunistic. He was deliberate. There's a difference. Months later, I visited him once. Not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to look at him without fear. The visiting room was sterile. Neutral. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Internally diminished. He studied me as if trying to understand when I stopped being controllable. You've ruined everything, he said. I shook my head gently. No. You did. Silence stretched between us. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Why didn't you just walk away? I met his eyes, the same eyes I used to search for approval. Because you tried to make sure I couldn't. And that was the truth. I never visited again. I didn't need to. The lake house is different now. Brighter. Restored. I installed cameras. Reinforced locks. Not because I'm afraid. But because security is wisdom, not weakness. My grandmother's foundation now funds independent structural inspections for low-income housing projects. We provide legal resources for tenants facing negligence. We advocate transparency in development contracts. Every time I sign a grant approval, I remember the contract he prayed I'd never find. And I smile. People online still call it a revenge story. A dramatic fall. A daughter's comeback. But to me, it's simpler. It's survival. It's accountability. It's what happens when someone underestimates the quiet child in the corner who was always watching. He thought I was fragile. Emotional. Expensive. Replaceable. He signed a document believing I would never wake up. But I did. And when I opened my eyes, I didn't just see what he'd done. I saw who I had to become. Not his victim. Not his shadow. Not his burden. His consequence. If there's one thing that I learned through all of this, it's this. When someone shows you that they value money over your life, believe them the first time. And when they try to bury you, make sure you rise where everyone can see you. Because ghosts dawn.